Oh, it's so dark. Okay. And so it was, I say, to the dwarf Joan was our country embodied, our country made visible flesh cast in a gracious form. When she stood before others, they saw Joan of Arc, but he saw France. Sometimes he would speak of her by that name. It shows you how it was embedded in his mind and how real it was to him. The world has called our kings by it, but I know of none of them who has had so good a right as she to that sublime title. When the march past was finished, front and rode at the head of the column. When we began to file past those grim bastilles, I could glimpse the men within standing to their guns and ready to empty death into our ranks. Such a faintness came over me, and such a sickness, that all things seemed to turn dim and swim before my eyes. And the other boys looked droopy too, I thought, including Paladin, although I do not know this for certain, because he was ahead of me and I had to keep my eyes out toward the Bastille side, because I could wince better when I saw what to wince at. But Joan was at home in paradise, I might say. She sat up straight, and I could see that she was feeling different from me. The awfulest thing, and I was the silence. There wasn't a sound, but the squeaking of the saddles, the measured tramplings, and the sneezing of the horses, afflicted by the smothering dust clouds which they kicked up. I wanted to sneeze myself, but it seemed to me that I would rather go unsneezed or suffer even a bitter torture, if there is one, than attract attention to myself. I was not of a rank to make suggestions, or I would have suggested that if we went faster, we should get by sooner. It seemed to me that it was an ill-judged time to be taking a walk. Just as we were drifting up that suffocating stillness past a great cannon that stood just within a raised portcullis, with nothing between me and it but a most uncommon jackass in there split the world with his bray, and I fell out of the saddle. Sir Bertrand grabbed me as I went, which was well, for if I had gone to the ground in my armor, I could not have gotten up again by myself. The English warders on the battlements laughed a coarse laugh, forgetting that every one must begin, and that there had been a time when they themselves would have fared no better when shot by a jackass. The English never uttered a challenge, nor fired a shot. It was said afterwards that when their men saw the maid riding at the front, and saw how lovely she was, their eagle courage cooled down in many cases and vanished in the rest, they feeling certain that the creature was not mortal, but the very child of Satan, and so the officers were prudent and did not try to make them fight. It was said that some of the officers were affected by the same superstitious fears. Well, in any case, they never offered to molest us, and we poked by all the grisly fortresses in peace. During the march, I cut up with my devotions, which were in arrears, so it was not at all a loss, and no profit for me after all. It was on this march that the histories say Dunois told Joan that the English were expecting reinforcements under the command of Sir John Falstaff, and that she turned upon him and said, "Bastard, bastard, in God's name, I warn you to let me know of his coming as soon as you hear of it. For if he passes without my knowledge, you shall lose your head." It may be so. It may be so. I don't deny it. But I didn't hear it. If she really said it, I think that only meant she should take off his official head, degrade him from his command. It was not like her to threaten a comrade's life. She did have her doubts of her generals, as so entitled to them, for she was all for storm and assault, and they were for holding still and tiring the English out. Since they did not believe in her way and were experienced old soldiers, it would be natural for them to prefer their own and try to get around carrying hers out. But I did hear something that the histories didn't mention and don't know about. I heard Joan say that now that the garrisons on the other side had been weakened, to strengthen those on our side. The most effective point of operations had shifted to the south shore, so she meant to go over there and storm the forts which held the bridge end, and that would open up the communication with our own dominions and raise the siege. The generals began to balk privately right away, but they only baffled and delayed her, and that for only 4 days. But I did not hear. But I did hear all Orleans met the army at the gate and huzzaed at it through the bannered streets to the various quarters, but nobody had to rock it to sleep. It slumped down dog-tired, for Dunois had rushed it without mercy, and for the next 24 hours it would be quiet, all but the snoring. When we got home, breakfast for us minor friar was waiting in our mess room, and the family honored us by coming to eat it with us. The nice old treasurer, and in fact all three, were flatteringly eager to hear about our adventures. Nobody asked the paladin to begin, but he did begin, because now that his specially ordained and peculiar military rank set him above everybody on the personal staff but old Donlon, who didn't eat with us. He didn't care a farthing for the knight's nobility nor mine, but took precedence in the talk whenever it suited him, which was all the time, because he was born that way, he said. God be thanked, we found the army in admirable condition. I think I have never seen a finer body of animals. Animals, said Miss Catherine. I'll explain to you what he means, asked Noel. I will trouble you not to trouble yourself to explain anything for me, said the paladin loftily. I have reason to think. That is his way, said Noel. Always when he thinks he has reason to think, he thinks he does think, but this is an error. He didn't see the army. I noticed him, and he didn't see it. He was troubled by his old complaint. What is his old complaint? Catherine asked. Prudence, I said, seeing my chance to help. But it was not a fortunate remark, for the paladin said. It probably isn't your turn to criticize people's prudence, you who fall out of the saddle when a donkey brays. They all laughed, and I was ashamed of myself for my hasty smartness. I said, it isn't quite fair for you to say I fell out on account of the donkey's braying. It was emotion, just ordinary emotion. Very well, if you want to call it that, I am not objecting. What would you call it, said Bertrand? Well, whatever it was excusable, I think. All of you have learned how to behave in hot hand-to-hand engagements, and you don't need to be ashamed of your record in that matter. But in a walk-along in front of death with one's hand idle and no noise, no music, and nothing going on is a very trying situation. If I were you, de Conte, I would name the emotion. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It was as straight and sensible a speech as ever I heard, and I was grateful for the opening you gave me. So I came out and said it. It was fear. And thank you for the honest idea, too. It was the cleanest and best way out, said the old treasurer. You've done well, my lad. That made me comfortable, and when Miss Catherine said, it's what I think, too, I was grateful to myself for getting into that scrape. So Jean de Metz said, we were all in a body together when the donkey brayed, and it was dismally still at the time. I don't see how any young campaigner could escape some little touch of that emotion. He looked about him with a pleasant expression of inquiry on his good face, and at each pair of eyes in turn met his head, and they were all nodding in confession. Even the paladin delivered his nod. That surprised everybody and saved the standard-bearer's credit. It was clever of him. Nobody believed he could tell the truth that way without practice, or would tell the particular sort of truth either, with or without practice. I suppose he judged it would favorably impress the family. Then the old treasurer said, passing the forts in that trying way required the same sort of nerve that a person must have when ghosts are about him in the dark, I should think. What does the standard-bearer think? Well, I don't quite know about that, sir. I've often thought I would like to see a ghost if I... Would you? Exclaimed the young lady. We've got one. Would you try that one? Will you? She was so eager and pretty that the paladin said straight out that he would. And then as none of the rest had bravery enough to expose the fear that was in him, one volunteered after the other with a prompt mouth and a sick heart, till all were shipped for the voyage. And the girl clapped her hands in glee, and the parents were gratified too, saying that the ghost of their house had been a dread and a misery to them and their forebears for generations, and nobody had ever been found yet who was willing to confront them and find out what their trouble was. so that the family could heal it and content the poor spectres and beguile them to tranquillity and peace.